Chapter 15b. The long, warm rain had done strange things to the herbaceous beds which bordered the walk by the lower wall. There were things sprouting and pushing out from the roots of clumps of plants, and there were actually here and there glimpses of royal purple and yellow unfurling among the stems of crocuses. 6 months before, Mistress Mary would have not seen how the world was waking up, but now she missed nothing. When she had reached the place where the door hid itself under the ivy, she was startled by a curious, loud sound. It was the caw-caw of a crow, and it came from the top of the wall. And when she looked up, there sat a big, glossy-plumaged, blue-black bird, looking down at her very wisely indeed. She had never seen a crow so close before, and it made her a little nervous. But the next moment, he spread his wings and flapped away across the garden. She hoped he was not going to stay inside. She pushed the door open, wondering if he would. When she got fairly into the garden, she saw that he probably did intend to stay, because he had alighted on a dwarf apple tree, and under the apple tree was lying a little reddish animal with a bushy tail, and both of them were watching the stooping body and rust-red head of Deacon, who was kneeling on the grass, working hard. Mary flew across the grass to him. "Oh, Deacon, Deacon," she cried out, "how could you get here so early? How could you? The sun has only just got up." He got up himself, laughing and glowing and tasseled, his eyes like a little bit of the sky. "Eh?" he said. "I was up long before him. How could I have stayed in bed? The world's all fair begun again this morning, it has, and it's working and humming and scratching and piping and nest building and breathing out scents till you've got to be out in it instead of lying on your back." And when the sun did jump up, the moor went mad for joy. I was in the midst of the heather, and I ran like mad myself, shouting and singing, and I come straight here. I couldn't have stayed away, while the garden was just laying here waiting for me. Mary put her hands on her chest, panting as if she had been running herself. "Oh, Deacon, Deacon," she said, "I'm so happy I can scarcely breathe." Seeing him talking to a stranger, the little bushy-tailed animal rose from its place under the tree and came to him, and the rook, cawing once, flew down from its branch and settled quietly on his shoulder. "This is the little fox cub," he said, rubbing the little reddish animal's head. "It's named Captain. And this here's Soot. Soot, he flew across the moor with me and Captain. Captain ran the same as if the hounds had been after him, and they both felt as joyous as I did." Neither of the creatures looked as if he were the least afraid of Mary. When Deacon began to walk about, Soot stayed on his shoulder, and Captain trotted quietly close to his side. "See here," said Deacon. "See how these have pushed up, and these, and these, and hey, look at these here." He threw himself upon his knees, and Mary went down beside him. They had come upon a whole clump of crocuses, burst into purple and gold. Mary bent her face down and kissed them. "You never kiss a person in that way," she said when she lifted her head. "Flowers are so different." He looked puzzled, but he smiled. "Eh?" he said. "I've kissed my mother that way many a time, when I come in from the moor after a day's roaming, and she stood there at the door in the sun, looking so glad and comfortable." They ran from one part of the garden to another, and found so many wonders that they were obliged to remind themselves that they must whisper or speak low. He showed her swelling leaf buds on rose branches, which had seemed dead. He showed her 10,000 new green points pushing through the mold. They put their eager young noses to the earth and sniffed its warmed springtime breathing. They dug and pulled and laughed low with rapture until Mistress Mary's hair was quite as tumbled as Deacon's, and her cheeks were almost as poppy red as his. There was every joy on earth in the secret garden that morning, and in the midst of them came a delight more delightful than all, because it was more wonderful. Swiftly, something flew across the wall and darted through the trees to a close-grown corner. A little flare of red-breasted bird with something hanging in its beak. Deacon stood quite still, and he put his hand on Mary, almost as if they had suddenly found themselves laughing in a church. "We mustn't stir," he whispered. "We mustn't scarce breathe. I knowed he was mate hunting when I seen him last. It's Ben Weatherstaff's robin. He's building his nest, and he'll stay here if us don't flight him." They settled down softly upon the grass, and they sat without moving. "Us mustn't seem as if we're watching him," said Deacon. "He'd be out with us for good if he got the notion that we was interfering now. He'll be a good bit different till all this is over. He's setting up housekeeping. He'll be shyer and readier to take things ill. He's got no time for visiting and gossiping. Us must keep still and try to look as if us was grass and trees and bushes. And then, when he's got used to seeing us, I'll chirp a bit, and he'll know that we'll not be in his way." Mistress Mary was not at all sure that she knew, as Deacon seemed to, how to look like grass and trees and bushes. But he had said the strange thing as if it were the simplest and most natural thing in the world, and she felt it must be quite easy for him, and indeed she watched him for a few minutes carefully, wondering if it was possible for him to quietly turn green and put out branches and leaves. But he only sat wonderfully still, and when he spoke, he dropped his voice to such a softness that it was curious that she could hear him, but she could. "It's part of the springtime, this nest building is," he said. "I warrant it's been going on the same ever since the world was begun. They've got their own way of thinking and doing things, and a body had better not meddle. You can lose a friend in springtime easier than in any other season if you're too curious." "Oh, if we talk about him, I can't help looking at him," Mary said as softly as possible. "We must talk of something else. There is something I want to tell you." "Yes, he'll like it better if us talks of something else," said Deacon. "What is it that you've got to tell me?"